Yeah, it was a really interesting period in my life where I was working at Google and also in recovery meetings and 12-step meetings. So I would leave the Google office in Manhattan and walk a couple blocks to a 12-step meeting. And, in those meetings, I learned two things. One, I learned that the root of addiction isn't the substance itself, but it's something called a spiritual malady. In addiction language, they call it like a God shaped hole. I talk about it like an emptiness, like this empty feeling that no amount of external things can fill. And so I would leave those meetings and go back into the halls of Google and look around and think to myself, all of these people have this spiritual malady, this empty feeling. It's just wearing something that looks a lot more socially acceptable and grand.
Today's episode is brought to you by Dunedain Systems. Dunedain is excited to introduce Warmind, an AI platform purpose-built for the military. Warmind supports operational product generation, massively accelerating planning, operations knowledge management, and intel workflows. What makes Warmind different is it actually connects to your unit's data and learns how your specific warfighting function operates. It's not some generic chatbot. It's a full agentic system built by warfighters for warfighters. Warmind understands, learns, and helps you iterate on your SOPs, your planning processes, your MTO, your operational doctrine, and more. Units across SOCOM, the broader DoD, are already using it, already cutting workflows that used to take days down to minutes. Now, the beta is free for a limited time for .mil and .edu users. So head over to dunedinsystems.com. That's DUNEDAIN systems.com and just hit try for free. Today's episode sponsor is Aditon, creators of Aditon Operations Kit, the military's go-to software for personnel and equipment accountability. AOK goes where you do, any network, anytime, any place. I got to know Aditon's co-founders, James and JJ, several years ago. They are former Army NCOs who have years of experience in the tech industry. They understand that most military jobs aren't performed behind a computer desk. Personnel and operations are distributed, but accountability of property is paramount to making mission. That's where Logi, AOK's equipment management software, comes into play. Formerly known as 92X, Logi is a next generation of equipment management for the military. Logi offers unrivaled features for military teams on the go. Ingest and digitize your primary and sub-hand receipts. Generate and share sub-hand receipts and DA forms with your team in just a few clicks. Capture photos, tags, and notes across your team to build context on the state of equipment. Get easy on-the-go access to critical property records. Logi is custom built for the modern military professional. It gives you your valuable time back so you can get back to the mission at hand at home or in the field. Whether you're doing monthly inventories or preparing for deployment, Logi is your pocket property book, giving you real-time visibility into equipment status and mission readiness. Logi is currently in use across the U.S. Army Special Forces, and it's expanding. For a limited time, listeners of the From the Green Notebook podcast can try out Logi for free. Visit aditonbbc.com/FTGN-Logi to get started. That's adytonpbc.com/FTGN-LOGE. How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
The Green Notebook, carried by military leaders around the world. Within those pages are sweat, tears, triumphs, and the hard-won lessons of life. Lessons worth sharing. Each week, the team dives into the notebooks of military leaders, business professionals, authors, athletes and coaches, and entertainers to share lessons and help you lead with the best version of yourself.
Welcome to another episode of From the Green Notebook. I'm your host, Joe Byerly, and today we're diving into the Green Notebook of Brooke Taylor, a career coach and the author of Healing the Success Wound, a book that explores why so many high achievers feel empty despite their accomplishments, and what it takes to build a life rooted in who you are, not just what you produce. I came across Brooke's work at a time when I was asking some hard questions about my own relationship with achievement, and her framework gave me a language for something I've been carrying for years but never fully understood: the success wound. It's this belief that your worth depends on what you achieve, what you produce, and how others see you, that you're only as valuable as your last accomplishment. And if you spend time in high performing environments, especially the military, you know exactly what that feels like. A career where your identity is tied to rank, performance, and forward motion, where rest feels like weakness, where slowing down feels like falling behind. And even when you hit the milestones you worked so hard for, something still feels off. In this conversation, Brooke introduces the 5 archetypes of the success wound, which we'll get into. And then once you hear them, I guarantee you, you will recognize yourself. I know I did. We talk about the difference between your true self and your protector self, why so many of us are living someone else's version of success, and what it looks like to work from alignment instead of fear. We also get into what happens when you step out of an achievement driven culture, but that internal pressure doesn't turn off. How easy is it to keep performing, keep producing without ever stopping to ask, is this actually what I want? This is a conversation about learning to separate who you are from what you do, about reconnecting with your body, identifying your core values, and building a life that feels true, not just impressive. Because this isn't about lowering your standards or giving up ambition. It's about understanding where that ambition is coming from and making sure you're not spending your life chasing someone else's definition of success. So grab your green notebooks and please welcome to the show, Brooke Taylor.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. I'll just share this quick story. So a couple months ago, I was like really wrestling with some stuff that was going on in my life. And I was trying to like, I was, in counseling, I do a lot of journaling, and I was like reflecting on it. And I realized that like what I was doing wasn't from like a place of warmth or growth. It was actually like I was like running away from something. And so I started like jotting down ideas or writing this piece called like warmth versus wounds, like
Mm.
why we do what we do. And so as the week I'm working on it, I get a copy of your book. I had to like put it to the side. I was like, I don't want to accidentally steal any of Brooke's ideas. But then as soon as I finished, I read it and I was like, man, this would have been a helpful framework, healing the success, like knowing what a success wound is, like years and years and years ago. So I'm glad we're now finally having this conversation.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that idea. And it's so helpful when we can have a name for something that's so universal and we all experience. So that's my greatest intention.
And I think what's really important in this book is like this isn't written like you didn't have a research idea or you weren't looking at it from like a purely academic standpoint. Like this is something that you've wrestled with or in the first part of your professional life or even in childhood, and then you finally like were able to put a name for it and help other people. So I was wondering if we could just start there and
Yeah.
share your story before we actually dive into the book.
Yeah. This was written from a place of deep searching for answers at a time where I desperately needed these answers, but I couldn't find them. I was born and raised in Silicon Valley in the 90s when there was a whole lot of money kind of coming into this environment, and intellect and achievement and big exits were what was like the standard for success. And that was like the soup that I was brewed in, so to speak. I had this very intense gold star chasing mentality, this idea of what success looked like from a very young age. And I took that gold star chasing mentality to a good college, to my first job at Google, where I started climbing the ladder. And my week looked something like this. Monday through Thursday, I would work really hard. I was managing a book of business that was $80 million dollars and working with, some of the biggest brands that you would know, including in the alcohol space and the food space. And I thought I had arrived. A lot of people dread the question, what do you do for work? I couldn't wait for somebody to ask me what I did for work so that I could, all but shove my business card in their face to tell them I worked for Google, because that brand equity of Google I borrowed as my own. People would assign these character traits to me like smart, determined, interesting, and their eyes would get really big. And that was, my ticket in. That was my sense of identity and self-worth. And I used Google's brand equity for my own, because without Google, who was I? But on the weekends, I only had one coping mechanism, which was to drink and to party. So I used alcohol and partying as my only way of kind of numbing this empty feeling that I felt underneath all of this, which was this kind of quiet, almost princess and the pea wondering of like, is this it? Is this what I want my life to look like? Who am I without Google? I didn't know. And so that brought me to some pretty dark places. Luckily for me, I hit rock bottom quite early because three big things happened kind of all in succession. The first was that I realized I had a problem with alcohol and I had a drinking problem, and that was something that I could no longer ignore. The second is that my dad had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and that causes you to ask questions about your life, right? When somebody close to you gets a terminal diagnosis. And then the third thing is that I was sexually harassed by my manager at Google, but I didn't report it because I was up for promotion and I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to anger or embarrass the people who could grant me the approval and belonging that I so desperately needed. It was almost like a drug in and of itself. So all these things, three things happening within weeks of each other caused me to really question everything and make me realize, sure, I had a dependence upon alcohol, but more deeply than that, I had a dependence upon approval, significance, and validation that, brought me to my knees. And so in that dark moment, I was like, what is this? What is this empty feeling that I have? I have so much. Why can I not grasp it? I can feel grateful for it, but it doesn't fill this emptiness, within. And so that became my question, which, 10 years later became the book.
And I think like just that story alone, I mean, I think so many people listening to this can relate to this. How many people love walking into a bar or a party and somebody's saying, "Well, what do you do for a living?" And if it's people that have know nothing about the military, just dropping the like Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force card,
Hmm.
Space Force. I guess I got to say Space Force now, Coast
Yeah.
Guard, or whatever, right? Like it's like okay, that's awesome. But then when you're in that crowd, even saying what you do within the military, like I'm a
Yes.
pilot or I'm an infantryman or I'm a ranger, I work at special operations, whatever. But like that becomes the thing, like your identity. And then,
Hmm.
you're working 70 hours a week a lot of times or just putting in ridiculous hours. So it's like, where's my outlet valve? It's the weekend, it's partying. So I think a lot of people listening can like be like, yep, that's me. And so
Hmm.
the question, like, where I know that I've heard your story. I think you talk about it in the book, but like, you were on a panel talking about this exact topic. So how did you arrive to this? I guess like where did this idea come from where
Hmm.
you started speaking on it and then people were coming up to you afterwards being like, Brooke, like that's me. Like that's something I'm wrestling with too.
Yeah, it was a really interesting period in my life where I was working at Google, and also in recovery meetings and 12-step meetings. So I would leave the Google office in Manhattan and walk a couple blocks to a 12-step meeting. And, in those meetings, I learned two things. One, I learned that the root of addiction isn't the substance itself, but it's something called a spiritual malady. In addiction language, they call it like a God shaped hole. I talk about it like an emptiness, like this empty feeling that no amount of external things can fill. And so I would leave those meetings and go back into the halls of Google and look around and think to myself, all of these people have this spiritual malady, this empty feeling. It's just wearing something that looks a lot more socially acceptable and grand. And so the veil like had been lifted for me, and I started coaching people and managing people and talking to them in this language where they would come to me and say things like, I'm only good as my last piece of feedback, or, I'm constantly wondering if people are mad at me. Or I think the next promotion, once I get to the next promotion, then I'll have more responsibility and then I'll finally like my job. Or, why is it that no matter how much I achieve, it never feels like enough? I would hear these things and I started speaking to them, kind of like in this language. Like, for example, the problem might not be the job, the problem might be you. Or, fulfillment comes from how you work, not what you do for work. And these, kind of light bulbs would go off for them. And I'd start talking to them like, not in a therapist context, but kind of like, anything that people are bringing to work where they're blaming the job itself, usually I would say like 60 to 80% of the time has less to do with the job and more to do with their expectations of the job. And so I was on a panel discussion at Google in combination with Kate Spade, which is a women's luxury brand, and Girls Who Code. And people from the audience started asking me questions like, how do you get a job at Google? What does it look like to work at Google? And I went a little off script and I started talking about how fulfillment is an inside job and how, so much of satisfaction comes from your working styles. And people started like nodding in the audience and coming up to me afterwards and saying, what you were talking about really speaks to me. And that's how my coaching program was born, was from not only my personal experience, but from this message that I was talking about that seemed to hit a chord with people in their hearts.
And like one other question, and then I promise we'll get to your book. I'm always curious on this too. Like you have this concept that's like really resonating with people. You've got women from all over corporate America starting to find their way to your door, asking for coaching advice. At what point are you like, I got to bet on me and like kind of cut ties with corporate America and go try this thing on my own?
Yeah, the honest answer was it was twofold. The first was that I knew in my heart I wanted to have a greater impact outside of the walls of Google. I guess Google, similar to the military, both huge organizations, right? Like you can have a whole career doing so many different things, pivoting internally. I would imagine
Yes, same,
that's
exact
the
same.
case, right?
Yes.
Like you could move across so many different teams. And so the same thing at Google. Like Google now is like 100,000 people. I could have such an impact internally for sure. But I knew that I wanted to have an even greater impact than that. I also knew that I wanted to be able to work, kind of like outside the confine without HR having, kind of an eye on what I'm doing. And I also didn't want them to own what I was doing. And so that was the vision, but I did build what I do today while working at Google in a compliant way. But people always ask, like, how did you know when it was time to take the leap? I think readiness is a choice. It's not a feeling. There was not a white light moment. I just decided that I was ready one day. It coincided with me and my now husband deciding to move to Australia. And so I took the leap at that point, but I just chose to, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to get sober. I wasn't ready to have a kid. There was no white light moment, but I chose all of those moments. And I believe in that really deeply.
I love that because again, same thing for me. Like I knew that I wanted to do something different. I knew I wanted to go into the writing space. And I remember it was like 6 months before my retirement. And like, I mean, the decision had already been made. Like I'm leaving. Like I've got my orders in hand to leave the army. And I had no idea like how this was all going to work out. I just knew
Mm-hmm.
like there was this inner knowing, which we'll get to a little bit
Mm-hmm.
later in the interview, but
Mm-hmm.
there's this like inner knowing that it would be the thing. It would work out for me. And so, but I had to like make that leap. I had to make that choice. And I've talked to so many people who almost feel like they feel that inner pull, but they also feel stuck,
Mm.
scared to like step off the train and go do something for themselves.
Yeah. There are there are 5 ways that this success wound shows up. And the most common one is that analysis paralysis that masquerades as responsibility, right? Well, it's not responsible to bet on myself, or it's not responsible to put my dreams ahead of my family's financial well being. But really, I think that's just a fear of failure and a fear of rejection or fear of embarrassment. And that's the most common way. That's the most common way that we hold ourselves back in our career, for sure.
Well, let's go ahead and just so when you say success wound, like how do you define it?
Yeah. The success wound is the pain that comes from mistaking success, productivity, and achievement for self worth. It's the underlying belief that my worthiness of love and belonging is contingent upon what I produce, achieve, or do, rather than the inherent goodness of who I am. And one of my clients said it best. Her name was Sutton. And we were sitting at a Starbucks one day in like New York City's financial district. And it was our first session. She was at a big bank next door and she finished, her cup of coffee and she kind of held this empty, the empty, what's the paper Starbucks cup that like when you tap it sounds really hollow. And she was like, it's like this Starbucks cup should hold all of my achievements. I'm consistently ranked within the top 15%. I have a full 401k. I have a VP title. I have a family that loves me. I live in a very safe, great neighborhood. Why does it feel like this cup is consistently empty? And that is the visceral feeling of the success wound. Like, no matter what, we can't grasp or hold on to the satisfaction of our achievements. And it always feels elusive. And I really believe that this is the thing that's driving career dissatisfaction as almost an epidemic today.
Yeah. And there's a quote a little bit later in the book, and you kind of just talk about like this like false bill of goods that we're sold, which is if we build the successful thing, just on the other side of it is going to be this like, and I'm messing up your quote, but
Mm-hmm.
this like Shangri-La, this perfect life, this happiness. And so you're right. Like we keep racking up achievements, keep racking up top performance evaluations. We keep getting the top assignments. We keep quote unquote arriving, only to look and like the goalpost is another 50 yards down the field. And yeah, I think like I kind of hit the same point in my career much later. I was like, I keep achieving, but I don't feel yeah, like I just like it still feels like there's something there. And I think what's really important is you talk about like so people could be listening to this and be like, oh, that's not me. But I would love to hear like what happens to people when they keep chasing things and don't actually heal the success wound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the interesting questions in the research that I love to ask is what is the image of the successful, I'm putting that in quotes, or optimal working person as you see it? Because we all have this image, but we rarely talk about what it is. So I'm curious for yours, but for mine as it exists today, of the perfect optimal working woman, it's this idea of like the effortless entrepreneur, the person who is invited into all of the right rooms, invited into all the best podcasts, whose revenue goes up and to the right effortlessly quarter after quarter after quarter, who attracts great PR to herself, who people want, are lining up to work for. It's almost like a mix of, if any of these names mean anything to you, like a Brene Brown, a Gabby Bernstein, and like I don't know, a Ryan Holiday, right? So those thought leaders. So for you, I'm curious for you, like if you have an image of that in your mind that you're constantly kind of measuring yourself to even today.
Yeah, I think for me, like, and I'll go back to military career, which a lot of people are in the rat race still, was like one, getting selected for a command position to be in charge of people. But being the person that everybody goes to for, to solve tough problems. If there's a assignment that's like a top billet assignment, they're going to look to you first to fill that
Mm-hmm.
job. And so I think like for me, like that was it. And then everybody's looking at your leadership and people want to follow you. And it's just like everything is perfect. And I think one of the things that happened is I got to this point and I realized that like, oh my gosh, like I finally made it and my career is no longer my own. Like I'm no longer deciding
Right.
where I want to go. Like people are pulling me into jobs that I may not want to do. But I'm having to because I made it to this point. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be at all. So that was the image I had back
Yes.
then.
Yeah. And I think so many people can relate to that. And one of the interesting findings is that along gender lines, I call this the success ideal, which is again that unconscious image that we're all comparing ourselves to, which in the gap between our reality and that image lies our deficiency and our inadequacy. And so along gender lines, the most common words that show up when a woman describes her success ideal are the words that I used: effortless, perfect, balanced. And the words that come up most often when men describe their success ideal: power, go to, wealth, provider, right? And that aligns with the data that says that we men and women just experience shame in different ways. For women, the source of shame is often around looks, appearance, perfection. For men, it's often around power and providing, right? So I just think it's fascinating, even us both talking about those,
Yeah.
because it's easy to forget how gendered and how culturally driven these images are.
Yeah, and I imagine too, again, going back to your client. Well, real quick, I'll just say this. Like Brene is on my bucket list for
Oh yeah.
just one day.
You'll get her.
One
You'll get
day.
her. She does
So
work with the army and the military. I feel like, yeah,
one
she does a
day.
lot of work with
Yeah.
them.
So if you're
Hmm.
listening to this and you know Brene, like please set this up. So
Me too.
um, but yeah, I think like the other thing, like, you talk about it in your book, like also, culturally, women are kind of expected to do multiple things, like not just succeed in the workplace, but also like be mom and or even start a family. Like there's just all these cultural expectations. I think a lot of times us men don't necessarily appreciate. And I definitely like now that I'm in this new phase of my life where I'm remote, I have a lot more autonomy. Like it's like, man, like to do this and balance all the household stuff, like running
Hmm.
the kids around, like you'll figure this stuff out in a couple of years, Brooke, when you have to experience. But like you're living for like these other people, your kids, and there's all sorts of things that go into that. And I think it's just anyways, it's unfair sometimes the expectations that we put on women to
Hmm.
succeed in both, or that you put on
Yeah.
yourselves, I guess.
It's true. And I think there are just two interesting points that I think anybody would find fascinating. There are two biases that exist within the workplace for women that I think are underappreciated. The first is one called the maybe baby effect, which is that when women who are maybe partnered and of childbearing years, they maybe or could have a baby in the future. So they're more likely to get passed up for promotion or less likely to be handed like an interesting piece of work because they could go off and maybe have kids. And I think that's so fascinating because we often talk about parents and all of the wonderful concessions that we've made for parents in the workplace to find things that are, find ways that people can stay in the workplace and have kids. And I'm going through this right now. I have a 14-month-old, which is what, it's an interesting time. But I also think that people without kids, are also, again, can be passed up for opportunities too. So I just think that that's really fascinating and something that we could all just watch out for.
Yeah, there you go. So, one thing too that I think is interesting again is like if you aren't healing your success wound, um, all of a sudden you may find yourself involved in substance abuse, burnout. What are some of the other things that you've seen with your clients that just keep trying to pack that wound with achievement?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all relate to the time where we have a really busy time in our lives or our career, right? Like a really big deadline, really big project coming up, a really big deliverable, a really big mission. And it's kind of like all hands on deck, all your energy and focus goes towards that thing. And it's not just that we're working to make sure that we hit the deadline or we deliver a good job. It's the emotional pressure we put on top of that, right? What does it mean if this thing fails about me? What
Mm,
does it mean about my capacity, about my value if it's suboptimal? Or if my, boss or, supervisor doesn't like it, what does that mean about me? And so I always talk about the fact that there's the work and then there's the emotional load on top of that work. And my work with my clients is to say this work in my left hand is always going to be there. There's always going to be a deadline. You're always going to want to do your best. But the self talk on top of it is what causes us to collapse at the end of that project with a sinus infection, with chronic pain, with back pain, with burnout, with the desire to reach for something like, I don't know, nicotine or alcohol or a vacation that we can't afford in order to relieve not just the stress of the work itself, but the emotional cost of the success wound on top of that. And so I always think about, okay, again, the work is inevitable, but the suffering on top of it is optional. And how can we, and there's so much science behind lowering the negative self talk and lowering, kind of like the noise on top of that and how that can provide better health outcomes, better performance outcomes. Because, yes, sure, workaholism, alcoholism, chronic pain, all of that is severe consequences of this. And I've seen it time and time again.
and before, I want to talk about unfulfilled achievers, which are people who walk around with this wound. And I'm sure it's a lot of people who listen to this show are like that. But one point I do want to make that I learned from you that I again, is another thing I wish I would have known much earlier, is this idea that there's a difference between self-worth and self-confidence. And I was getting them mixed up. I remember, like, I was like, "I struggle with self-confidence," and someone was like, "Well, how?" Like, you keep taking on these, like, challenging jobs, you have a blog, you have a podcast, like, you keep putting yourself out there, like, I don't think it's self-confidence, and I was like, "Okay, you're right." But now I realize, like, no, it was self-worth. Like, I had to
Mm,
do these things because without them, like, who was I?
right, right. Well said. And I think a lot of people can relate to the idea of feeling confident in certain areas. For example, so confidence is contextual. I can feel confident talking to you. I can feel confident talking to the next podcast. And then when I go, sit on my couch later that day, I can feel still poorly about myself or question, oh, did I answer that in the right way? Or, what did they think about me? The spiral that happens afterwards. So self worth is like the floor and confidence is the ceiling. But we don't rise to the level of our confidence. We always fall to the level of our self worth. And so this success wound is a worthiness wound. It's what, like you said, it's the habit of tying what we do to who we are, such that our worth then rises and falls within however we're feeling about, not just like the truth of what happened, right? But however we're feeling about what happened. A lot of clients of mine come to me and say, or I can relate to this. My husband owns a construction business, and it's a new business, and we're both entrepreneurs, and maybe you can relate to this with your partner. It's like the business can be doing the exact same week over week, but how we feel about the business can change. And so we'll often ask each other, how do you feel about the business today? And he'll be like, oh, I have to remind him, success is not a feeling. Success is not a feeling. It's not, like success is so subjective. And so I think that's the importance of rising our self-worth as opposed to aspiring to confidence. And you can see this maybe also in the dating world, right? It's like people who put on like a false confidence, but in those quiet moments, you can feel how someone feels about themselves. And so that's why this book is aimed at very specific practical tools to help you raise your self-worth as opposed to aspiring to being confident, if that makes sense.
It does. And so what are the 5, like, you call them 5 archetypes, but what are the 5 ways in which the success wound will show up in our lives?
Yeah. So, given the research, people tend to fall into 5 categories. The first is the grinder. So, this is the behavior or the person who wants to have more, do more, be more, who measures their value as a person based on their productivity for that day or that week. They get a high from crossing something off their to do list, and they love being a machine and plowing through things. The second and the most common is the hider. This is the person who secretly harbors big dreams for their career, but a fear of failure, embarrassment, financial insecurity stops them before they can even start. They often call, kind of going big or the things that they want to do quote, irresponsible. So they kind of stay where they are. And they can look successful from the outside. Hide in plain sight, but it's an inner state of like, I know I'm not living up to my potential. The third is the pleaser. This is the person who is constantly wondering, are you mad at me? How am I doing? I'm only as good as my last piece of feedback. I can't piss them off. So this is somebody who, lives to please others and typically has like an anxious attachment style in other areas of their life. You're nodding. You're like, I know.
I was like, okay, I'm a grinder and then like a work hard, play hard, which I
Uh-huh.
just interrupted you, so I'm sorry. But then I took the quiz this morning and I was like, I'm a pleaser. What? No. But now, like, as you're describing it, I'm like, God, yeah, a little bit.
Mm. It can be common to have a grinder pleaser overlap, kind of similar to
Yeah.
an Enneagram if you're
Yeah.
familiar, right? So it's like in the Venn diagram of these things, it's like, I'm going to work really hard to make you like me, for example. But I think the pleaser, what I love about the quiz in this work is like, what's the core here that's driving everything, right? And like the grinding can look good on the surface, but it's like, what's the core? And I think that pleaser core is really common for a
Yep,
lot of
that's mine.
people.
We can just keep going. What are the
Okay,
other?
we'll keep going. We can talk offline. um, the fourth one is the seeker. We all have a friend like this, the person who lives in a state of career confusion to full blown existential crisis, maybe all in the same day. This is the person who is constantly asking, are you my purpose? Or is this next job it? Who's constantly on a cleanse or dating the next person or hopping from job to job or idea to idea, thinking that this thing is finally going to be the thing that solves their career problems and makes them feel fulfilled. They're always looking for something to save them from themselves. And then the final person, which is the one that I was at Google, is the work hard, play hard. And this is the person who lives in extremes and can live in that seesaw of pain and pleasure. So they love being, called the get shit done person or the best, and they love attention and eyeballs, but they also like numbing out in just as extreme ways. And the difference between the grinder, the first one, and the work hard, play hard is in their relationship with relief and play. Grinders find relief through doing more. Work hard, play hards find relief in that outlet, that, the drink or whatever, the extreme, the vacation. And so, a lot of people are like, well, work hard, play hard, isn't that just somebody in their 20s? Most of my work hard, play hards are working parents who need that relief and kind of like look for that intense relief. Understandably so.
Yeah. Like there's, as I was like reading these, I know like I have several friends who are seekers, and they're almost like that person at the grocery store who just keeps changing aisles constantly.
Yeah.
Like they'll get in one aisle and be like, okay, this one's moving a little bit slow right now. And then they'll just jump in another one. And like, you've already checked out and are out in the car, and they're still like bouncing around to different aisles with like no progress. But
what you're highlighting here is the restlessness, right?
yes.
It's like that restlessness. I can't just soothe the part of me that wants to jump and press the escape button. And that is so much the work for the seeker, is to be like, how, not in an avoidant way, but how can I be okay staying a little bit longer?
Yeah. And then the work hard, play hard, I think that's huge. Like I think there's so many people in the military that relate to that too, because one of the things that we have, we have 2 weeks in the winter, 2 weeks in the summer where we get this like vacation time. And I remember like for the longest time, I lived my life in these like 6-month increments where like I had this idea that I was going to be going on this vacation 6 months from now. And I had to get to this, this Shangri-La of 2 weeks and just completely let off steam, or like get to the weekend, have a party and just let loose. But you were always working, like literally working to the weekend or working to that 2-week break period. And you had to have those things to be able to unwind and to reset yourself.
Understandable. So much stress. I had an internship at the US Embassy in Paris one summer, and I worked in the press office, and there were Marines who guarded the embassy in Paris, and we would hang out after work. And they were certainly in that work hard, play hard category, because they worked so hard. They were under so much stress and needed to blow off steam. So I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's part of it. I'd like to introduce you to our newest partner, Roger Bank, a modern digital military bank built by military members for military members. Whether you're stationed stateside or overseas, Roger is designed to meet the unique needs of our men and women in uniform. I recently opened an account myself, and the process was incredibly smooth. It took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Now, here's why I'm excited to partner with Roger. They offer high-yield checking and savings accounts, 0 account fees, early payday, and automatic savings with Roundup Match. Their military-ready direct deposit form is even auto-populated and signed by the CEO, saving you time and hassle. Plus, you get free global ATM access, real person customer support, and they even offer accounts for service members as young as 17. Funds are FDIC insured through Citizens Bank of Edmond, so you can bank with confidence and peace of mind. Visit roger.bank to learn more. That's ROGER.bank. And I think what's really important is like, just because, if you have these aren't bad things. Like, I think it's just a matter of, are you like reacting? Are you compulsive in these different things? Or are you using the power and leverage behind them very deliberately to achieve? And I felt like for a long time, like as you're talking, and we won't go into me anymore, but I was just like, I was like, I wasn't like I was needing these relationships, needing the validation that came from other people, because I do have an anxious attachment style, which may be another episode of the podcast at some point. Um, but then like, again, like now it's, I work towards leveraging that, like my ability to, maintain and foster relationships, to, get harmony and to get stuff done. So
Hmm.
I think like that's a really great difference for people to know. It's like everything has a light side and a dark side to it, which you talk about in the book.
Yes, yes. I want to make two things extremely clear, which is all of these constellations of behaviors are parts of us that can be used with such strength. And the central question of the whole book is, what part of your psyche are you working from? You said it at the beginning. You called it warmth versus wound. I call it, kind of like true self versus wounded self, success wound. And, you know, the purpose of this book is to heal the need to work from a place of needing to prove, or work from a place of lack, scarcity, anxiety, or fear, and instead harness the incredible power of the grinder's work ethic, of the pleaser's empathy and harmony, of the work hard, play hard's intensity, of the seeker's desire to seek and curiosity build and look for a better solution, and the hiders, kind of like understandable, like trepidation and saying, okay, let's go slowly, let's go carefully. There are strengths in all of these. And the beautiful part of this work is what happens when we can, dial up the strengths and dial down the suffering. That's all this is about. There's no kind of like perfection or black and white about any of this. It's all on a spectrum.
And you mentioned your true self, which then gets into Dr. Schwartz's integrated family systems work. Could you talk about how that influenced you, and then how the framework in which you've taken that and breaking down your three selves?
Yeah, I remember I went on a workshop weekend once. In one of those times, of your life where you're looking for answers, and things are feeling a bit like rusty and stuck. And maybe for me, I tend to I go towards like anxiety or depression when things feel a little off. I feel a little sad. And so I signed up for this workshop, not knowing what I would get out of it. But when we arrived there, they said something that stuck with me forever and really changed the way that I see myself and others, which is the fact that within our psyches and within ourselves, we're not one singular self. We actually have three parts of our psyche. And the first part is this part of us called the true self. And before you write me off as being called like eat, pray, love, or woo woo or whatever, this is a very real psychological concept, which is that we're all born with this inherent capacity for clarity, confidence, presence, playfulness, perseverance, um, connection, courage, all of these great C words and all of these great P words. This is the part of you that's at their best, maybe when you're sitting on the couch with your partner or chasing your kids around or having a really interesting, deep conversation. This is the part of you that comes out when you feel safe, centered, secure, warm, whatever that is, whatever that means to you. Then naturally, as we go through life, we experience hurt, pain, shame, and that creates a second part of our psyche called the wounded self. This is the part of our psyche that harbors all of those hurt feelings that often live in the recesses of our mind. Carl Jung would call this the, unconscious mind. Other people might call it your shadow or your pain body. Eckhart Tolle calls it. And then as soon as that wounded self is created, we also have this third part of our psyche called the protector self. And this protector self is determined to not let that wounded part of us ever get activated again. So it develops strategies to protect it, like perfecting things so that nobody can call you incompetent, or speaking really loudly so that you'll get eyeballs on you so that you won't feel inadequate, or the opposite of that, maybe hiding parts of yourself or masking up or putting armor up so that you won't be seen as vulnerable. Those five behaviors that I just talked about, hiding, grinding, seeking, etc., that's our protector self. That's the part of us that shows up at work to protect the pain of the success wound so that we won't have to feel any sort of shame of being called out again as like incompetent or inadequate or not valuable, or not making the mark in some way. And so whenever my clients are talking to me and saying things like, you know, I'm the one that's in my own way. Nothing's in my way except me. Or they're saying something like, I don't know why, but like no matter what I do, I can't stop this pattern of overworking or underworking. Or I know what I want. I know the next thing that I want in my career or in my life, but I can't seem to stop. I can't seem to get out of my own way. That's because your protector self is running the show. And so the aim and our protector self naturally wants us to stay in the same pattern. It wants us to stay put. It wants us to stay safe, certain, and in control. And so we know we're in our protector self when it's like Groundhog Day, when we're doing the same thing and expecting different results. We know we're in our protector self when we're frustrated with ourselves that we can't break the pattern. And so what I love about this work is the fact that the aim of it is to heal that wound so that the protector self can step aside and the true self can start to lead more often than not.
Yeah. And I definitely, you said, like, I definitely don't think like the idea of the true self and Jungian psychology of like, it's woo woo. Like, I believe it 100%. And you quote Joseph Campbell quite a bit. I'm a huge Campbell fan. And like one of the things that he wrote is that when you were on your path, not somebody else's path, doors will open for you that wouldn't have opened before, that wouldn't open for anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the quote goes on to say it becomes like a ball that just rolls and picks up momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And then going back to once I realized that like I know what work I want to do. And the scary part for me was getting off the military train and going to explore this unknown space to go follow my own path. Um, Things started happening, things started clicking into place, opportunities that like I could have never imagined just started showing up. So I 100% believe that, Brooke. And
Mm-hmm.
it's crazy. It's it's been almost 2 years now since I've retired and it still doesn't feel like I'm working. And I'm doing so much crap. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm still like grinding a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but it just doesn't it's from a different place now. It's from a place of warmth. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's because I'm aligned with my true self. I have aligned ambition, which I want to ask you to define that next. But yeah, it changes the game completely. So much so that I wake up way earlier now than I did when I had to in the military because I'm just like ready to tackle the day every day.
Mm-hmm. That's so good to hear. Yeah, I talk about Joseph Campbell, and then two of the other examples that I talk about of the importance of working from your true self and how powerful that can be in your career is the example of Tim Cook, who was Steve Jobs' successor at Apple. And he talks about being a very analytical person, a very black and white thinker. But when it comes to matters of his career, he says intuition is more important than intellect for him. And he talks about this moment where he was at Compaq, which was a company in Silicon
Yeah.
Valley. Cannot remember what it does now, but I remember hearing about it
It
when I
was
was
a
growing
computer
up.
company. Yeah, I remember that. I used to have
Yes,
compact computers.
there you go, a computer company. And he had a job offer at Apple. And he said his pro con list kept showing up to stay at Compaq. It was the responsible thing to do, it was the logical thing to do. But he said there was another voice within him that urged him to join Apple, and he couldn't ignore that voice, and that was the best career decision he's ever made. And he continues to be an analytical person, but
Wow.
when it comes down to it, he uses his intuition more than his intellect. And I love this example because the CEO of Apple, extremely successful, understandably has an engineering mind, but our intuition often is putting together pieces that our logical mind could never, and that a pro con list would never yield. And so that is really the power of staying in alignment with your true self and learning the cues and the signs of it in order to be successful at work.
And I have a question too, because like a lot of people in the military, because a lot of it's like you do a 20-year career. It's kind of like built into our culture. So, I continue to do something that I signed up for at 22 years old,
Mm,
until I was like 42. And I changed a lot along the way. If you were to go back and like tell a younger version of yourself what you're doing now, do you think that person would like understand or like just like not even like wait, you would leave Google to go do this thing on your own? Is would a conversation like that kind of take place?
You know what's fascinating is that actually a TED Talk got me sober. And it got me sober before, like 10 years before I even stopped drinking. And I share this story just to say I was studying abroad in Cape Town. I had a really scary night out. And I woke up the next day somewhere I shouldn't have been. And I did what any self respecting millennial would do, which is opened her laptop and dialed up YouTube and typed in some example of like, why can I not stop drinking even though I'm blonde from the Bay Area and have an education? Something along those lines. And I'm saying that just to say, like, I just didn't have another example of somebody like me. Like, I thought an alcoholic was somebody who was on the street and destitute and maybe
Right.
old and male. I didn't know a 21-year-old could have this. And so a TED Talk came up of this woman talking about the fact that she was able to get sober by developing a relationship with a God of her own understanding. And there was something about that moment and that woman that changed my life forever. It really pierced my heart and it awoken something in me. And even though I kept drinking for 3 more years, that woman came to a church down the street from my apartment in New York. I went up to her. I went and saw her book talk or whatever, and went up to her afterwards and was like, I saw your YouTube video 3 years ago. It really changed my life. I think I still have a problem with drugs and alcohol, but I don't know what to do about it. She gave me her number. She took me to a meeting and she became my grand sponsor, like my
Oh,
sponsor's
cool.
sponsor. I share this story to say, I think there are always clues in our lives around what we want to do and what we're meant
Mm.
to do. We just have to pay attention to them. And that moment for me, this moment of a woman sharing her story very vulnerably, quite literally saved my life in a way I could never have orchestrated and I can only conceive of as divine timing. I want to, in whatever way, share my story to help somebody else. So I think there is a Brooke who can believe it, but never would have believed that she would have the courage to go after that. It was possible for her, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and it's really amazing. And so, like, eventually, you found your true self, and listened to the intuition, and that's why we're having this conversation today, and you have the book behind you. But like, I'm curious, like, for somebody listening to this right now, like, what are some steps they can take to um, start healing the wounded self, telling the protector self to like just hang out over there for just 5 minutes
Hmm.
and then really get to understand their true selves.
Yeah. We heal on 3 levels, which is the first is emotional, the second is mental, the third is on the level of action and behavior. And the first one being emotional, I think often people hear, okay, how do emotional healing that has to happen in therapy? And yes, I love that for a lot of people. But one very practical thing that you can do when you feel your success wound being activated, when you feel that pit in your stomach, because again, you have a deadline coming up and maybe things aren't tracking the way that you want them to, or you just got a bad piece of feedback and in some way you feel like you're not making the mark, or you are spiraling at night with that anxiety that lives as a closed fist in your stomach. um, uh, Before I go on, when you have that like activation for you, where do you feel that in your body? Is it a pit in your stomach? Is it a tightness in your throat?
Yeah, it's a pit in my stomach. Like it's like I guess the sternum, like the top of the
Hmm.
stomach. It's like right there, and I can feel it. It starts there, and then it'll start like kind of like going out to like my shoulders. It's crazy when it
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. Beautiful example. So, my suggestion for people when they're in that moment of feeling that inadequacy, that shame, that success wound activation of like, what's going to happen? Am I enough? Am I being called out? Is to first locate it in your body in the way that Joe just did, in the way that I just did. And then the second is to give that feeling 3 adjectives. So, when you're in that moment, Joe, what adjectives would you use to describe that sensation in your sternum and then off to your
Yeah,
shoulders?
it'd be like tightness. Um, I know it'd be like tightness. It would be like heaviness.
Hmm.
Um, and then like yeah, like maybe it's you put me on the spot. I'm the interviewer, Brooke. Um, maybe I don't know. Like yeah, it's like painful. Like
Mhm, mhm,
when I feel
mhm,
that, yeah.
mhm. Yeah, tight, heavy pain. Tight, heavy pain. Some people say, red hot. tingles. Other people say gripping fist. Whatever that sensation is to you, locate it in your body. Use 3 adjectives to give it some sort of texture. And then the final thing I want you to do in that moment is to ask that sensation a question. And that question can be as simple as, what do you want me to know? Why are you here? What are you afraid of? Asking that question to the sensation and letting the answer come from that part of you, not necessarily from your head. Sometimes it sounds like a bubbling up, and it speaks in very simple language. I'm scared. I'm worried. Sometimes it can sound like, kind of like the spins, like the, catastrophizing that can happen. But often it's not a story. It's not a like, well, this is going to happen and that because it's more just like, I'm scared. I'm scared something's going to happen. I'm worried. And so what happens when we ask a question of the feeling and let it answer is that listening that we're doing creates a relaxation response in the body. Listening creates a relaxation response in the body, which allows us to take a deep breath and to create a little bit of separation between ourselves and the feeling. Because our feelings actually have wisdom for us. But what happens is that we do one of two things. We either push it down and keep going, or we give into the feeling in a way that creates overwhelm and anxiety, right? And so by asking it a question, creating separation, listening for the answer is how we can extract the wisdom. So now let's say, for example, the answer, which is very common, that comes like, I'm scared I'm not enough. I'm scared I'm falling behind. I'm scared I'm being judged. We then need to look at the answer to that question and start to dialogue with it a little bit. Understand what the belief underneath that is. So most often the belief is like, again, if I'm not the best, I'm the worst. If I don't get this done, then, I'm behind in life. Or something along the lines of like, if they don't like me, then I'm not going to be successful, right? Whatever that is. And then we can understand that that's the core belief that we're contending with. And we can take it through the level of, we can take it through a couple questions and start to challenge it. But I love that emotional tool because it's very practical in a moment that we can do when we're starting to spiral.
I got a quick question for you before I ask my next one. I know we only had an hour and I've totally screwed this interview up. Do we have a little bit more time? Or
Yeah.
Okay,
Plenty
perfect.
of time.
Okay.
You haven't screwed anything up.
Okay. It's my, like, I felt the thing in my stomach. Okay. So
There it is again.
yeah. So I guess like, as you start like, as you start diving into this, as you start reflecting, as you start trying to figure it out, then I think it's like really important. You talk about it in the book too, is to understand like your values. And this was something like we have like the army values, which, like loyalty, duty. And it's like these like corporate slogan values, which are great. I'm not knocking them. But like I just kind of thought values for the longest time were like these like very like lofty, um, like idealistic things. But I didn't realize how important naming your values are, um, to be like into getting to your true self and then to actually make decisions based off those. And so is that something that like you've worked with a lot with your clients as well?
Yeah, people are like, okay, great, I'm on board. I want to find, Joseph Campbell, I want to find my bliss. Tim Cook, I want to make decisions from my intuition. How the hell do I access that? Our values are a really quick way there. Our values are the things that we hold most dear in our lives. They're the things that we're willing to take a stand for. I would imagine your audience, probably practices and professes values pretty strongly. And those personal values are like your own personal code of conduct, right? They're your ethics and morals. And the most important thing about values is that they have to come from your true self rather than your protect yourself or your wounding. So, for example, a really easy way to know if this value is real is if you were to imagine the value, let's just say of freedom, which is like one of my big values, and I define freedom as like the ability to kind of like live my life in a way that feels best for me. If that freedom was on the table in front of us and was taken off the table, like it was no longer part of my life, I would have a visceral reaction to that. I'd be like, no, like I need this in my life. And so that's a really easy way to see if it's a core value of yours. Now, be careful with values like control, safety, security, because those can often come from, again, like a success wounded place or a protect yourself. And so there's an activity in the book where you can define your values, but it's essential, especially in your career.
Yeah, and again, I thought that activity was great because it actually lists them out. It's funny you said freedom. Mine's autonomy. And so
Mm-hmm.
just recently, I had a job opportunity where it was awesome. Like my achievement wound, like self would be like, this is perfect. It pays double what I'm making now. Um, but it would have required me to be in a location. It was like hybrid. So it required me to be in a location several times a week.
Mm,
Um, and there's a lot of cool things about the job. I would have probably had a lot of fun with it. But when I balanced that up against that value of autonomy, I realized that like, no, that would step all over that and
mm-hmm,
said
mm-hmm,
no. And I don't think I would have done that younger. I would have been enamored by like the title and what came along with that job,
mm-hmm,
and not have started from an internal place of
mm-hmm.
what are the things in which I value and does this align with those values?
And what you've hit on too is that what a lot of people fall for is the shiny object syndrome, especially the seeker, and they don't understand that fulfillment comes from how you work, not what you do for work. And so you've lived in a state where you know what it feels like to live without autonomy in your career and in your life. And so that's another sign that something's a core value is when you know what it feels like to live in the absence of that value, such that that now becomes so central to your career.
Yeah, so let's talk about as you are coaching your clients and you talk about in the book, this idea of aligned ambition. I love that term so much because it's like ambition with a North Star.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, aligned ambition is the state of contentment, harmony, and fulfillment that comes from taking directions in your life and in your career from your true self over your success wound. And if you had told me that that is a central idea in my career when I was, 23, had a deliverable, was trying to get people on board, influence others, close the deal, I'd be like, that's a nice idea, but how is that going to help me in my life? And that thought of like, okay, how is aligned ambition going to help me actually misses like a critical component of human motivation, which is so intrinsic in this, which is that, naturally, when we are seeking goals that matter to us intrinsically, that come from a place of wanting to experience progress, wanting to experience autonomy, wanting to experience meaning, that's when we're able to actually achieve more with less energy. We're able to get into a state of flow more often, and we're able to work from a state of regulation and collaboration rather than a need to prove yourself, to control, to manipulate, which is what naturally creates that state at the end of the project or the end of the deadline where we're collapsing and getting, a sinus infection, if not worse. So aligned ambition is the only way of working that actually works if your goal is to work in a way that centers flow and fulfillment. And a lot of people get there maybe after 10, 20 years in their career, right? Or if ever. But this is the way of working that actually works that I found.
And do you find like with your clients and even with yourself that like when you get to a state of aligned ambition, it like the things are no longer on the other side of the hill. Like it's the stuff in the here and now. Like the work is the reward in and of itself. Is that pretty accurate for you?
Yeah, yeah, that's accurate. It becomes more of a career becomes more of an expression of your strengths, your values, your desire to contribute. It moves the locus of control or the desire to be in the future to the desire to be in the moment. A lot of people say like the process is the point. I would take that a step further and say, it's more about like creativity and impact and purpose being expressed through your work. So just as an example, you know, you this might sound a lot of people listening could be like, okay, this sounds like altruistic. I don't want to have to leave the military to experience this. I experienced aligned ambition when I was still at Google and for 3 years. And what this looked like was that I was able to pivot my career to get off the toxic team and onto a team that actually centered more of my interest and my strengths around public speaking, around marketing, around managing people. I had more energy because I was no longer in that pain pleasure seesaw, that work hard, play hard state. So I ended up getting a coaching certificate and an advanced degree because I was no longer hungover on the weekends or stressed about my job in a way that was causing sleeplessness and me needing to collapse on, after work. And so I got that advanced degree. I was able to start a side coaching business. And I was able to, from that side coaching business, be a better manager for my team at Google. I was able to have more innovative ideas because I was no longer stressed about just like delivering the thing, but I was like, ooh, how could we make this better? How could we bring in other stakeholders or collaborators? Or how could we make this like a better place for others? So that's just and as a result, I got promoted faster than I normally would have. And I remember getting the sales award with a nice kind of bonus. And I remember that moment being like, okay, this is nice, but this is not the reward. Like I was certainly not doing it for this, which is whereas a past version of me was like, the trophy and the bonus was everything. So that's a very practical example of how this could look.
Okay, now that you've said that, I love that you said that and brought that up. And now that you said it, because I'm a pleaser, I'm now worried about like, okay, like what are the listeners thinking about me? And so I feel like, yeah, like if I look back on my military career, because we were moving, like a lot of it was out of my control. Like you're in this job for so long and now you're going to go do this job and now you're going to do that job. So there were certain jobs in my career where I did feel like it was aligned with my values and what I wanted to do and who I was. And then for my final job in command, when I knew I was going to retire, I was no longer worried about the next job after that or doing things that would like place me for the next level of advancement. I was shaping that particular job to be aligned with what I valued. And I got so much out of that experience. And it became like one of the highlights of my career before I retired. So yeah, you can reframe and even in the military, reframe how you show up to work and then again focus those things on, your what you understand values and approach it from your true self instead of from a wound. So yeah, I just had to throw that in there because I was like, man, as you're talking, I was like, I feel terrible.
It's easy in these positions, to put a narrative on top of this. It's like, then I switched jobs or then I became this entrepreneur and then everything was, great. But it's true. It's these little tiny choices that we make in our current position that can make work feel better, whether it's a tough conversation with a boss that you've been putting off that changes your relationship with that manager, right? Or, shifting up your management style such that you feel a little bit more connected to your team or the people who are reporting to you. Those small shifts are what create fulfillment. And the reason why 60% of people who come to me looking for a new job end up staying, not because they're lazy or because they can't find another job, but because they make these small tweaks, which change their experience of the job itself.
Amazing. Well, Brooke, thank you so much for your time. If people are listening and they're like, man, what am I? Am I a seeker? Am I a pleaser? Am I a grinder? Where can you have a quiz on? I mean, I mentioned it earlier, but like, where can they find the quiz in order to figure out what they are?
You can go to brooketaylorcoaching.com/quiz and take the digital version. There's also a quiz in the book, Healing the Success Wound, at the beginning of the book. In the digital version, it'll give you some very specific tips that you can make and tweaks you can make today in order to operate from aligned ambition. The quiz is a great option too.
And then where else can people find you? Because I follow your Instagram as well.
Yeah, on Instagram, I'm Brooke V. Taylor. If anyone's on TikTok, I'm Brooke Taylor, career coach. And people who are, who liked the interview can, of course, send me an email, brooke@brooketaylorcoaching.com.
Awesome. Well, Brooke, again, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for letting us go over a little bit. And I appreciate your book and I appreciate the conversation today.
Me too. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. That was great.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of From the Green Notebook podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us gain visibility and the opportunity to help more people on their leadership journey. Also, make sure you check out our website at www.fromthegreennotebook.com. There, you can listen to past episodes, read leadership articles written by military leaders from around the world. You can sign up for our monthly reading list email where you can learn about new books that are coming out, and our Sunday reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. Is really short. It's a 2-minute read, but I guarantee you it's going to start your week off on the right foot. Finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter at FTGN Notebook, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for From the Green Notebook. Again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. I am humbled by the opportunity to learn these lessons alongside you. So please join us next week for another episode of From the Green Notebook, where we're going to help you lead with the best version of yourself.
I came from the mud.